So there's no getting around it. Today's project was kind of a bust. Still, it doesn't mean that we can't learn from it. So, ladies and gentlemen, this is Dev Diary, a series where I try to make my own video games. And so if game dev videos are your thing, consider subscribing to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss future videos. The original goal was to make a 2D version of like that 3D Kirby game where like Kirby can become a car. In other words, a top-down 2D world with platforming. In other words, a massive mistake due to many unexpected issues. So first and foremost, we've got our player character, which is some kind of a dragon or something, I'm not sure. It can move around like one would in a top-down game, but of course also has the ability to jump, or hover if the player holds the jump button down. Now hovering is slower than walking and also depletes a stamina meter, though this meter will refill anytime the player isn't hovering. And you know, so far so good, other than the ugly auto tiling that glitched out in some places. Anyway, it's this jump/hover thing that caused the most issues. Like originally, the player was supposed to be able to jump onto the elevated walls, which sounded like a really easy thing to do. You know, just work with a Z-axis. Now, I'm not new to utilizing the Z-axis. Back when I fiddled with 3D in GameMaker, like, you know, when I tried remaking Minecraft, making the player hop a block wasn't a problem. The difference, however, was in the execution. Back then, objects were used to check for collisions, and this time I decided to use GameMaker's tile collision system, and that was a mistake. See, as far as I can tell, GameMaker's tile collision is about as bare bones as it gets. There's no real information that can be gleaned from it. So something like an information grid would have to be used in sync with the tile layer, which, I mean, at that point, why not just make your own custom collision system, right? But in that moment of sheer stubbornness, I believed in the tile collision functionality and tried to make it work. A few wasted hours later, and it was finally clear that this wasn't going to work. So now the player just cannot cross walls at all, because I didn't have time to write something custom. But what I do have time for is a quick reminder that if you enjoy the content, supporting me on Patreon is the best way to help me keep making it. Doing so can get you access to exclusive content and downloads, and even early access to the weekly Dev Diary videos before they're released on YouTube. Now, pitfalls managed to work pretty well, but still nowhere near as elegant as using custom code. Checking for collisions on pitfall tiles were pretty black and white, which resulted in some silly deaths that shouldn't occur, but indeed falling in a hole will result in the player losing. As for the enemies inhabiting this land, there are two variants. There is a flying enemy and a slime enemy who remains grounded. Each are pretty basic in their behavior, mostly patrolling in random directions while chasing down the player when near enough. The only way that the player can defend themselves against these enemies is to smash them with a butt bump. This requires players to hover in the air and press shift, which will send them back down to the ground like a little meteor. Assuming any nearby enemies are below in their Z position and near enough to the butt bump radius, they will take damage and be tossed in a random direction. And fun fact, the player's butt bump can totally send slimes straight into a pitfall, taking them out instantly. And in order to win, the player has to collect all the coins scattered across the level. This requires hovering over pitfalls and fighting back against any enemies in their way from collecting said coins. It was purposely meant to be a very basic premise. This way we could focus on building a base system of mechanics. But in the end, it just resulted in a mess of ideas, none of which worked out exactly right. I mean, heck, even using GameMaker's SDF features resulted in these weird boxes when trying to add a simple outline effect. All in all, this really just felt like the project was doomed from the start. While a lot of the things worked, almost everything had like an exception, you know? The Z-axis worked, but not with walls. Some elements work like normal, but you know, sometimes glitch out randomly because nothing ever can just be simple. But that's the beauty of game dev. Sometimes trying new things will result in major failures. Sometimes things that you've done 100 times will suddenly break on the 101st attempt. Now, I'm not giving up on this idea, but I think that if I try it again, I'm just gonna stick with the classics. And so this week, I don't know, let me know what was the last new project that you worked on, and was it a failure or was it a success? Honestly, whatever is on your mind, be sure to share it in the comments. And if you enjoyed today's video, first, bless you, and also maybe consider leaving a like. Now, with that said, brings us to the end of today's Dev Diary, so thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.